today's workshop, we will be going over press freezes, and there's really not much to it. So this is for if you've never done a press freeze before, or if you already do press freezes, these tips should help you out. So I put a Google Doc in the chat for you guys to check out, and if you guys are watching this from YouTube later on, it's in the description, the link to the Google Docs. But basically, I'm going to be teaching tuck planche and then L-sit, and then how those correlate into other press freezes. And then I'll demonstrate like a couple press freezes. Maybe I'll teach one or two, but the practice methods are pretty much the same. The methods for doing tuck planche and L-sit. Most press freezes where you're like pinned on your arm or stuff, something like that, the principles are pretty much the same. Today's workshop will be relatively short because I'm only really teaching like 2 freezes mainly, and then the rest derive from that. So maybe we'll spend some time and just leave some time for you guys to knock this out as well. So first one, what we're gonna do is 2-hand presses. So basically everything will go from 2-hand and then to 1-hand, but pretty much once you get 2-hand presses down, you'll kind of get a feel for how it is. And it's basically based off the tuck planche and your L-sit. So we got tuck planche, which your arms shoulder width apart. You can have your fingers pointing straight forward, diagonal, or sideways, like I always say in my stream. And then remember, keep your elbows locked. So whenever you do this, or majority of press freezes, especially when starting, keep those elbows locked. I think later on, once you get to 1-hand presses and start doing more complex things, you can bend your elbows, but for beginners' sake, always keep that elbow locked, no matter what. And with your arm shoulder width apart, you're gonna lean forward with those shoulders like this. Maybe not, I'm kind of exaggerating here, but you're gonna lean forward with those shoulders, and this is gonna help you, like if you're in the back like this, all the weight that's on this side of my arms, like from here onward, you know, it's gonna weigh me down. So every time I try to pick up, it's gonna weigh me down. So leaning forward is gonna counterbalance all the weight that's on this side of my arm. So I'm leaning forward. Actually, maybe I'm not exaggerating. This is how far I lean forward when I do it, just to counterbalance all the weight that's on the back side of my arm. So you really want to lean forward with those shoulders. And of course, when you're doing this, you might fall forward a little bit, but it's okay. Just use your knees, catch yourself. If you have a mat, yoga mat, anything like that, if you lean too far forward, even if you're on carpet, I recommend just getting used to finding that sweet spot where you lean too far forward. And yeah, experiment around with that, because everyone's is going to be different. Some people can just do it straight. Some people need to lean more, some people need to lean less. So the next thing, after you lean forward with your shoulders to counterbalance all the weight that's behind your arm, you're gonna curl in your back. And what this is gonna allow you to do is not only get more height, but also tighten up that core. So when you curl up like this, your core is gonna be tightened. Everything is gonna be super tight. And if I don't even lift my knees off the ground, I'm already able to lift them a little bit. So I already have a start there. The next thing you're gonna do is pull those knees to your chest, basically giving yourself clearance throughout this whole space right here. So pull my knees to my chest, curl that back in and lean forward, arm shoulder width apart. And then you're gonna tap, lift over those feet. And I know when you're starting this, it's gonna be really difficult to just lift those feet up. So even if you start like this with your feet just on the ground, still engage that core, bring those knees to your chest, elbows locked. Basically from here, like this whole like part, my collar and my neck, like I just kind of keep it like tight. Like I'm flexing like my shoulders, my traps, and kind of like my neck as I lean forward. So basically everything up here in the back and kind of like in the front of these shoulders, like this whole upper part is like flexing like this. It's like almost like you're pushing something away, like really, really hard. If you are not comfortable with tuck planche, and this practice method will be the same for L-sit once we get to it, you want to lean forward, Have your toes, you can have your feet on the ground, it doesn't matter. But practice just lifting it and holding it for 1 second. Practice holding it for 2 seconds, a little bit longer. Do it again, practice holding it for 3 seconds, and then so on, until you get more comfortable with it. Just remember, for this move, and most moves, I mean all moves, as far as presses are concerned, don't hold your breath. Remember to breathe. So, if you guys are looking in the notes, there is a lot of things I emphasize, or 2 things in particular that I emphasize. Tighten your core, and remember to breathe. So, as I'm doing this, I'm not holding that breath in. The way I'm breathing, at first, at least when we do our regular stream, when I hold it for a minute, I breathe through my nose only, just like, as if, kind of like it's no big deal, like, and then once it starts getting a little bit more like taxing on me, then I go nose, like inhale nose, exhale mouth. And then once I get tired enough, then I usually get to that point and I finish out the minute. But nose, mouth, nose, mouth. It's kind of my breathing pattern once I get tired, but try to keep a normal pattern going as you're doing this. And it's a lot easier to have a breathing pattern with this, or like recognize your breathing pattern, because when you're doing power moves, there's a lot going on and it's really difficult. So use this as kind of like a catalyst to practice your breathing with a harder position, if that makes sense. So just remember to breathe, tighten that core, bring those legs to your chest. Just like any of the frees, you want to flex those legs. So as soon as they're in your chest, you want to like crunch them tight. And even if your feet are on the floor, continue. Keep your core tight. Keep those legs flexed like this. And if I were practicing this and like from 0, I would just practice holding this, even if my feet are on the ground. You should feel the same engagement. But I would only recommend that after you tried holding it and picking up. So even if you have to hop up, go ahead and do that. As long as you're engaging those shoulders, that core, tightening up those legs, you should be able to get through and hold that. Your arms can be bent for starters, but just remember, in the long run, you're gonna want to straighten them. Because if you bend your arms, you're gonna feel it like everywhere. But if you keep your arms locked and you lean forward, you're gonna feel a lot more in your shoulders. So it's gonna, a lot more weight is gonna be concentrated on your shoulders if you keep it locked. But in the long run, it's gonna help you save energy. So it's gonna at first seem like, oh, I can muscle through this if I bend my arms. But if I keep my shoulders locked, or my elbows locked, and use my shoulders, it's gonna be a lot more difficult at first. But once you get used to it, it's gonna actually not take up as much energy in the long run if you're trying to hold it for long term. And I guess as kind of like a tangent, I'll move on to how to get to regular planche or straddle planche. So I'll go into actually like how to do an open planche. So before I get to L-sit, I'll just do a real quick planche tutorial. So this is gonna be real brief because there's some planche tutorials out there, and it's kind of why I was saying you can use a wall, but I'll get to that in a little bit. So once you get tuck planche down, you don't have to have it for a whole minute. Just do it until you're comfortable. And let me get back in focus. All right, there we go. So as long as you have your tuck planche comfortable, you're gonna wanna pick up like this. Once you get this down, you wanna try to push your knees, instead of towards your chest, you're gonna put them away from your chest. You're gonna try to get a tuck planche like this. This is the goal, but upside down, obviously. So if you can do this, try opening those knees out. And then until it's straight, your body is flush like this, parallel to the ground. So when you do this, you're gonna have more of your body behind you, so you're gonna wanna lean forward more towards your shoulders. So again, you don't even have to have it down for a minute or anything like that. As long as you're comfortable, give it a shot. Just be careful, you might fall on your face, I might fall on my face, who knows. But again, keep those knees lifted. Once you have them towards you, pull them out and lean forward. So I didn't really open up my hips there, but you guys kind of get the idea. Going from handstand down into planche or tuck planche, from here, going down. Just remember, if you do handstand press, as you come down, you have to start leaning forward. So as I do my handstand and I come down, my shoulders lean more and more forward. So That tuck planche with my legs straight, like this, is actually really difficult. And then if you want to go straight into straddle planche, you actually don't have to get this planche down in order to try straddle planche. The way I do straddle planche, there's two practice methods, or I guess three. The first one is from tuck planche. You just practice opening out your legs, bring it back in. Just like tapping, so you're doing tuck planche and you tap, lift off. Same thing, but instead of tapping the ground, you're gonna tuck planche, open out, bring it back into tuck planche. So, for example, you're gonna tuck planche, leaning forward, open out, bring it back in. Open out, bring it back in. Open out, until you can do a tuck planche, and then open out and hold it. Whew. But I would say the most effective thing is probably basing everything from the tuck planche. All right, so the second way to do it for straddle is, instead of going from close to open, that was weird, close to open, do handstand, have your legs open already, and try going down into planche. But this is gonna be way more difficult, so just a heads up. So I guess the difficulty is going from easiest to most difficult. So instead of doing tuck planche to opening out from going low, we're gonna go high, from handstand going down. So you can handstand, straddle, and then practice going lower. This is gonna be a lot more difficult, so just a heads up. Whew. And I haven't done planches or presses in a while, so just keep in mind, good form for planche and tuck planche is to have your legs flush with your hips. I sometimes have my hips like kind of angled like this, but ideally you want to have it more flexed out. And then the closed leg planche, I can't really do them. I can do them for a little bit, but it's not too good. I guess the last method for practicing planche, as far as straddle goes or legs out, you can use a wall, and I'll show you on this wall real quick. You can either do it legs together against the wall, or you can have your legs open and straddle, have your feet against the wall. It also helps if you have socks on as well. So I'm gonna do it with this wall right here. And here's something like, here's I guess kind of a workout I used when I was learning planche. I don't use it anymore. I haven't used it in a long time. But what you want to do is start in push-up position, or like position yourself as if you're doing a planche already with your shoulders already leaning out. So if I were to do a push-up like this, my hands would be closer to my hips than a regular push-up. So if a regular push-up is right here, arms right underneath my shoulders, I'm gonna do it as if I'm doing a planche. And then push from here. Yeah. So that's gonna be, I guess, step one. Have your hands by your hips as if you're leaning forward on those shoulders. And then once you get used to that, I'm just gonna have my legs together. You do the same thing on a wall with your legs parallel. It's weird to do it at an angle, but I would have socks on. So do the same thing with the hands right by your hips. Push up, walk it back, push up. Let the legs drop as you go down, walk it back. So that's kind of a workout I found on YouTube a long time ago. I don't even know if that video was there, but it was so old. But it was such a good workout, and it really helped me with those shoulders. That's a way you could work it out, but I think, honestly, just doing tuck planche will help you out a lot. So those are the three practice methods. For getting, even if you want tuck planche, you can use that wall method too. But just remember, as you go down, let those legs slide down on the wall. Once you pick back up, walk those legs up until your body is flat. Don't walk it up until your body's at an angle. Do your best to keep it straight at least. So the three practice methods for planche, and I'll put this in the notes for later as well. But the three practice methods is from tuck planche, from low, opening out, or lifting up those hips. And then the next one is going to be from handstand, falling back down. So handstand, falling down into position. And the third one is gonna be with the wall. Just make sure your hands are as close to your hips as possible, as if you're leaning, doing a planche. Put those feet on the wall, walk it down. I'll just do a demo. Let it slide, walk it up. Let it slide, walk it up. And your hand position can be the same. I like to have my hands like this instead of straight or sideways, but that's just my personal preference. Let's move on to L-sit and then the practice method. And I would honestly say, like, this is the practice methods. You can use these practice methods for any freeze, as far as like getting into the freeze, holding as long as you can, getting off, doing it again, holding as long as you can. You can do that for any freeze, but we'll get to that after I go over the L-sit. So L-sit is gonna be with your arms shoulder width apart, and I'll just do it facing the camera, with my arms shoulder width apart, and then your fingers can point straight or diagonal or sideways. If you have those bars, go ahead and use those as well. But I like to have my fingers diagonally, like planche, so that way when I do L-sit to planche, I don't have to reposition my hands, and also it's just easier for me. So exact same upper body as planche. So you're gonna push up with your hands and with your arms, keep those elbows locked until your hips lift off the ground like this. And then just like planche, you're gonna wanna lean forward with those shoulders and curl in that back. So like I said, from the torso all the way up, upper body is gonna be the exact same as tuck planche. So right here, this same position is what I'm doing in tuck planche. The only thing that's changing is the hips are now right below me, okay? So you curling your back in and leaning forward is gonna give you more height. So if I just pick up straight, not gonna get a whole lot of height, especially if I straighten my back. There's not much clearance between my butt and the ground. But if I lean forward and I curl my back in, you can see I have more space between my butt and the ground. So that's gonna be the main thing for pretty much presses across the board. The degree of which you lean forward, curl your back in, may not be as high as tuck planche or L-sit, but the technique still applies. So from L-sit, just the upper body, pushing, leaning forward, curling that back in. Now with your legs, what you're gonna wanna do is lift up those legs like this. You're gonna feel it, especially in your hips right here. So if you're doing like your splits, you're gonna feel it in your groin area, but not the center groin. You're gonna feel it right on top of your legs right here. So pretty much from your leg going all the way back, where your hip folds, that's where you're gonna feel it a lot. So just be prepared. The more you do this, the more you're gonna get used to it, especially for L-sit and lower presses like this. So I would practice, if flexibility is an issue for you, or if it starts cramping right here, practice having your hands forward like this. Keep that back straight and just try lifting those legs. Especially if you struggle lifting those legs, and before I used to lift them like this, that was as high as I can go, and the rest would be me just pushing it. But this exercise definitely helped out a lot. Also, another exercise in order to help get those legs up is doing a straddle. Doesn't have to be wide, it can be like this. It doesn't matter, but the idea is the same. Keep your back straight. I'll do it like this. Keep your back straight. You're gonna take your hands, place them somewhere along the line of your knee, one on the inside and one on the outside. And same thing as the other one, you're gonna lift that leg. And I would do 5 at a time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On this side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you're gonna feel it, like basically your entire quad, hamstring, everything, all the way up to your groin, you're gonna feel it. So just those 3 things alone, this front one, I'm not keeping my back straight, but keep your back straight. Straddle, straddle, keep your back straight. Lift, lift. That's how I work these muscles, joints, whatever they are, right there. The part that always cramps up, that's the workout I do. So once you get that down and you're a little bit more comfortable with folding those legs in, the idea is you're going to lean forward with your body, curl that back in, and then you're going to get more height on the bottom. And then you're going to use this part to flex your legs up. This is going to sandwich you and give you a little bit more height as you pick up. So this is going to help you pick up. If my back was straight and I wasn't leaning forward, so if my back was straight and I wasn't leaning forward, I don't have much space. But if I lean forward, look how much more space I have. I'll go forward a little bit. So if my back's straight, not leaning forward, back curled, leaning forward, I have a lot more space underneath me. So that is the secret to L-sits. A lot of people, oh, I don't have enough space to get through or to lift up or whatever, but really the secret is to lean forward, curl that back in. And then really this workout right here, and then doing the split one, is also something really useful for you. And if you attend my stream regularly, you'll know that same thing. Keep your core tight, keep your legs up. If you can't lift your legs up anymore, or you're cramping way too much, but you still want to continue to work it out, do the same thing, but keep your back, your upper body, do the same thing. Just practice holding this, have your core tight, and your legs flexed as well. And if you want to push it a little bit, but you can't quite do the L-sit, hold up one leg, switch, try holding the other. So those are some ways you can practice it, but I always recommend for tuck planche, for L-sit, doesn't matter. If you get to the point where you're like this, with your feet on the ground, don't start off like that. I always recommend starting off holding it as long as you can, that first go around. First or second time, really try and hold it as long as you can. So push up, hold it, 5 seconds is the max you can do, then get back down. Try it again. 3 seconds, oh man, 2 seconds, I can't go anymore. And then you can just start working on with your feet on the ground. That should be your last resort. I would not recommend starting off that, otherwise you're not really gonna get that same push that you would if you were just to do the actual move. So practice holding it as long as you can. Keep that core tight. Hold the actual move as long as you can. And then let it simmer down until you can't do it anymore. Then do it with your feet on the ground, whether it's tuck planche or L-sit. Just remember, keep that core tight. Keep those legs tight as well. This is the shorter part of the workshop, and we're probably going to end early if there are no questions. But getting into other presses. So other presses, there's two hands and there's one hand versions. We'll start with two hand presses that aren't necessarily L-sits or tuck planche. But I will say this, before I get into any of this, if you have a good tuck planche, if you have a good L-sit, learning other presses shouldn't be that much of a problem. Yes, L-sits and tuck planches are really useful just all around the board. And also, I guess before I get into other presses, the way I kind of started when I thought about doing like L-sits and planches is like, okay, these are the freeze positions for a flare. And that's what really helped me get my flares like really down packed, is because this is the position for a flare. So I'm an L-sit, then I go to planche, back to L-sit, back to planche. All right, so I'm in the positions for a flare. So L-sit, planche, L-sit, and then planche. So those are the positions you'll be in for flare. But it may not be that pretty when you do it like the way I just did it, but it really helps familiarize yourself with the position you're going to be in. It may not be the same outwardness as like a flare, but it gives your shoulders and your arms kind of like a general idea of where your what muscles are going to be activated. So that's kind of like the application, I guess, more so than just putting it in your round or using the moves for what it is. It kind of helps translate when you're learning flare and really maybe like air track. But for me, the thing that's helped the most is flare, at least for those two freezes. And then it also translates into other press freezes, which we will get into. Let's do the first part, which is two hands. So most two-hand presses, and this is the part where, you know, everyone's doing like these kind of freezes and stuff like that. Pretty much, if you can tuck planche well, you can pretty much get into these press freezes. And the way I would start is probably from this position. So have your arms shoulder width apart. I have them, actually, it doesn't really matter the hand position because, you know, I get into it from different ways. If I want to spin, I'll put my arm like this and I'll spin around, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. But for two-hand purposes, just have them down, shoulder width apart, and then just try doing this, hooking your ankle anywhere on your arm. Some people step on their foot. If you wear shoes and like if you're wearing Air Maxes, they're like spikes on your feet. So I don't step on my hand because I don't want to rely on my shoes to be like, I want to be able to do presses in Air Maxes. Okay, I said it. So I'm over here, I'm not stepping on my hand. You can if you want, but just pin it. And when you pin that leg, whether it's in your ankle, your foot, your knee, whatever is attached to your arm, you really have to push into your arm. So with this right here, I'm really pushing this leg into my arm. Like if my arm were to lift off the ground, I would like kick my arm forward. That's how much you want to use it. So start off with your arm shoulder width apart, maybe a little bit wider, it doesn't really matter. But you're going to use the same application for tuck planche. Really curl that back in, lean a little bit forward. Just try holding this. Same thing with the other side. Just try holding this right here. This is like a good start for doing free like presses and then into one-hand presses. So you're here, you can go the other side, and really when I'm doing these, there are going to be times where you can lift off, like you're not really pressing. But for the most part, especially when you're starting, really use that as a point for almost like you're like resting your leg on your arm. And then the next thing would be, instead of clipping it with your ankle, try putting your foot on your arm. Try doing this. And then the other side. All right, so there's a lot of things you can do. Same thing with your knee. So there's a lot of different, you're starting to see there's a lot of different ways you can approach presses. You have your knee pinned or the other side. You can go outside. Doesn't really matter. So as far as like two-hand presses go, most of it is going to be based off your tuck planche. So really get that tuck planche good, and then you can start expanding from there. And sometimes like learning a press freeze will be like learning a new move. Even if you have tuck planche down or else it down, may not mean you're going to get every press freeze. You'll probably get a lot of them, but not all of them. So for example, we'll get into one-hand presses, but for example, like this right here is one I practiced a lot. And then we'll get into one-hand presses. So there's a couple different ways to get into one-hand presses. The way I would start at first would be to just try and balance the two-hand presses and then shift your weight slowly onto that arm. So from here, shift over slowly, fingertips, and then practice bouncing. Same thing with the other side. Shift over, practice bouncing. Same thing with like your leg here, practice bouncing. But when you do certain one-hand presses, it's going to be like learning another move, and you may not have your other hand to start and like, you know, use as a lift-off point. So for this one in particular, I couldn't just use two hands on the ground and just pick up. I really have to like just jump into it and throw myself into that position. So the way I approach one-hand presses is really two things, or I guess three things. The first one is whatever leg you have free. So for example, this one, you really want to pull that leg up as much as you can, just like an L-sit. Really, really pull that up. The second thing, whatever's clipping your arm in a press, you really have to push it into your arm. So whether it's this freeze, this freeze, this freeze, you really have to dig that foot, that ankle, that knee, whatever it is, dig it into your arm. There are times where I've had like bruises on my arm because of it. I mean, it didn't really hurt, but it would just show red. So, for example, like this one, this free leg, I would pull it up. This foot, pin it. Once this leg is pulled up, I would sometimes pin this leg to this arm and just lean towards my shoulder. So instead of leaning forward, like in a tuck planche, I would be leaning this way because all my weight's on this side of my body, so I have to lean this way in order to do it. And my other hand would also lean this way, so I don't have to like lean as far. So just like kind of like doing air chair up or one hand star or something, like lean over, everything should be going this way. So pick this leg up, pin this leg, pin, and then lean. So if you guys want to try that freeze, more than welcome to do that. It's not going to be easy at first, but that's one example of a freeze you can't really get into with two hands to start. Another one would be, another one I use a lot is to have my arm down and then my ankle clipping. So it's a one-hand version of this one. But if you're going to do it one hand, it's probably not that great to start off in two hands and lift off, and it also will not give the same effect. So getting into it, for this one, I can tap my leg off like an air baby if I wanted to, but same principle. Really dig this ankle into my arm, lean forward, and then whatever leg that's free, kind of like pulling it towards me. So pin this, lean forward, bring this one in and flex. So pretty much you're combining elements from your tuck planche, which is leaning, and then your L-sit, which is pulling those legs in. So for example, also one of my signatures was this freeze to touch right here. Whenever I do this freeze, and I'll demonstrate it in a second, whenever I do this freeze, I'm actually pinning this leg onto this arm, and all my weight is leaning on this arm, and I'm leaning this way. This thigh is pinning and really pushing onto that arm, and I'm pulling those legs in. So I'd be doing here, 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 here. So that would be like one of the take home points. Really, whatever you're pinning to your arm, really pin it down, and then pull upwards with whatever legs you can, and then lean whichever direction is opposite of where you see all your weight is. But for the most part, doing it, if you can do a tuck planche and an L-sit, you're pretty much set. So get those down really good, and that's kind of like your bread and butter for presses. Oh, I'll go over spinning presses. So for example, let's do, whatever, I don't care. Let's do a lotus. So you're doing a lotus and you want to press underneath like this, right? So like you can just pick up and just do a lotus like this. But if you want, the way I spin usually is just around my wrist. So I don't spin that much. I don't do like a 90 spin, like with my palm on the ground, but I have my palm, you know when you do crickets, your palm is facing one way and you rotate around that wrist as you're on the ground. Same principle as this right here. Apply that same principle. So that's what I was saying earlier about not having your hands in a certain, in one placement when you're doing these presses is, so like if I have my hand facing backwards, I can spin it. Same thing with, whatever, I don't know, this one. Instead of just holding it with my fingers facing sideways, I can have my fingers facing backwards and spin. So you're spinning around your wrist, and if you have it down enough, you can do like a 90 spin on your wrist, depending on what the freeze is. Like I've seen people do like this spin right here and spin on the wrist. But I can't really do it. But for presses where a lot of weight is on your hand, I have my hand down and I rotate around that wrist. It's kind of like, yes, it's like a hang glide. So you can use that same principle when doing your presses. So let's say we're doing like this press right here. You can hold this, or if you have your hand cocked back, you can spin it. Or the other way around. So if I start instead of like here, my wrist like this, I can spin it. Yeah, those are like a couple ways to spin. There's the 90 type of spin where your wrist is like, or your palm is like spinning on the ground, and then there's the one where your wrist is kind of like turning. We will get into transitions. I think I already went over application, but just some quick transitions into them. So basically, like, how can I get into a position that can set me up? That's like the question for transitions. Maybe not so much for planche, but for and else it's kind of difficult as well. But let's say, like my sweeps workshop, for example, like let's do a dead leg. You're already in L-sit position. You can get into an L-sit and whatever derives from there. You can do a dead leg to L-sit, dead leg to figure four. So there's a couple ways you can get into it. And then if you're going for like one hand presses, there's one I do where you're here, you do a dead leg sweep, you pick up, you can get into different presses. As long as, basically the way I think about it is as long as I can get into this kind of position, I should be good to get into a press or L-sit or something like that. As long as you can get into the squatting position, you're fine. If you're in footwork, find a way, like when you're doing footwork, you're probably not going to get straight into this position, this closed squatting position, but you can find a way into it as well. So let's say you're doing footwork, you do a kick out or whatever, you can knee spin, and you're already in that position to jump into a freeze. So again, I'll just do it facing this way. You hop over on your knees, you can lean over. It's one way to do it. If you want to do a sweep coming out, I'm like this. All I have to do is wrap this leg around, pin it, and that's one of the ones I do as well. So there's a lot of ways into it. You can do, like if you're doing CCs, so you're doing a CC step here, CC, and instead of tapping, like going this way again and reaching over, I'm just gonna reach inward and then do another one. Something like that. So these press freezes don't necessarily have to be done as press freezes. You can apply them as steps. Yeah, so as far as application goes and transitions, you can use them like sweeps or something and transition specifically into or explicitly into that move, or you can incorporate that press freeze into a footwork step. So, for example, like this freeze that I like to do, I incorporated that into a footwork step. So, I don't even know if I can do it here, but you know, this is the freeze. So I did a swing, freeze, swing, freeze, swing, freeze. That's one of the ways I applied a press into my footwork. And you can do this any other way as well. So if you're here and you want to press crossing over, something like that, you can do hit, 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 something like that into a footwork step or a footwork pattern, right? Obviously there's a better way to get into it, but just different ideas you can play around with. So the thing with presses is there's a lot of opportunities with them. Some of them have already been done, but like hind leg is one of them, where everyone does this kind of stuff. But I would use this as a kind of like one for application as far as like learning flares and other moves, like incorporating that tuck planche and L-sit, not explicitly maybe. And then also like using it to explore different like leg positions and stuff like that. So For example, like this position right here, I don't have to do this position in a press freeze like this. I can do it like this. So I can press on my forearm, right? So it gives you a lot more opportunities to be more creative. So if you want to go from here to knee, pick up, you know, you have a lot of opportunities here. So you're here, or I don't know, like here, pin, pick up, stuff like that. Maybe someone does it, maybe someone doesn't, but you have a lot of different opportunities. I think these freezes are typically easier to flip. So if you find something that someone has already done before, there's probably a variation that hasn't been done. I saw that step and like I was like, oh, maybe I can turn it into a forward step, maybe I can do this or that. So these press freezes allow you to be a little bit more creative in a way. I wouldn't use that as like a catalyst to make that the only thing you do, because it's all kind of like creative, but just use it to add to whatever you know, whatever you're working with, and it's a great accent. And that's the thing with like when I teach, and this is kind of like a tangent since I have some time. That's the thing with freezes, and that's why I'm teaching all these freezes like as workshops, like before I teach anything else, is because all power is, and like I kind of touched on this before, but pretty much everything physically is derived from freezes, not historically. Like, you know, everything came from somewhere else, or it didn't originate from a freeze. But I would say if you master the freeze, it makes learning whatever power move, whatever footwork step a lot easier, if that makes sense. So like if you're learning windmill or halo, master your stabs. You know, if you're learning handstand, or I mean if you're learning 90 or air track, master your handstand. If you're learning elbow track, master your elbow freeze. Same thing like with flares. Like if you're trying to learn flares, like I learned tuck planche. I kind of got planche a little bit, and then like learned L-sit. You know, not necessarily like before you learn flares, but it's definitely going to help your flares once you learn them, if that makes sense. So these freezes that you practice, and once you master them, it's going to take your power and everything else to a whole nother level. So that's me going on a tangent about how much I love freezes, but that's why I'm teaching all these freezes first and foremost for these workshops. Okay, so I think we'll end it early today. I'll give you guys some time back. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Tomorrow we are getting back into the regular stream at 7 p.m. So if there are no more questions, thank you guys again so much for tuning into these workshops. If you have any more questions or have any feedback for me, you can always reach out to me on Instagram right here. Give me a follow on Instagram or Twitch. Ask me about After Hours group. Already said all that. So if there are no more questions, I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Peace.